My name is Scarlett Owens. I am 25 years old, and I am a senior structural engineer at Harman Infrastructure Group. I finished my degree at 22, joined the firm at 23, and was leading my first independent project before my 24th birthday. I do not say this to impress you. I say it because it matters for what happened at my sister's engagement dinner, and because the people in that room had no idea any of it was true. My family has never really understood what I do. When I try to explain structural engineering at the dinner table, eyes glaze over before I finish the first sentence. My father nods politely and changes the subject. My sister Simone once told me that my job sounded like something a robot should be doing. So, I stopped explaining. I showed up to family events, smiled at the right moments, answered questions about my apartment and my commute, and kept the part of my life that actually mattered. The drawings, the calculations, the buildings I was quietly responsible for holding up, entirely to myself. That was my normal. Until the night everything I had kept quiet walked into the same room and refused to stay that way. Simone got engaged on a Tuesday in early autumn. I found out via a group message that included 17 relatives and a photograph of the ring, which was large enough to qualify as a small country. She called me 20 minutes after sending it, not to tell me personally, but to ask whether I could make it to the engagement dinner she was already planning for the following month. I said yes. I wrote it in my calendar. I did not ask many questions about the man she was marrying because Simone and I had the kind of relationship where the details of her life arrived in announcements rather than conversations. She was 22 and beautiful and effortlessly magnetic, and she had spent her whole life moving through rooms the way light moves, drawing every eye without appearing to try. I was the older sister who worked too much and did not post enough on social media and showed up to family events in clothes that were clean, but not carefully chosen. We loved each other in the functional, slightly distant way that sisters sometimes do when they have grown into very different people. I did not know her fiancé's name until 3 days before the dinner. When I saw it, I went very still. His name was Marcus Webb. I had been working on his building for 18 months. I want to be precise about what that means, because the word working does not fully capture it. I had designed the entire load-bearing framework of Webb Tower, a 32-floor mixed-use development that was going to be the most significant structure his firm had ever built. I had spent 18 months running calculations, producing structural drawings, coordinating with the geotechnical team, reviewing foundation specifications, and making the decisions that would determine whether that building stood safely for the next 100 years. My name was on every technical document the project had ever produced. My signature was on every certification submitted to the city's building authority. Marcus Webb and I had communicated exclusively through project managers and long email chains. We had never spoken directly. We had never been in the same room. I knew that building from the inside out, every beam, every joint, every load path through its structure. He did not know my face. And now I was going to sit across a dinner table from him while my sister introduced me to 60 guests as the family embarrassment, with no idea that the most important name on his most important project was sitting right there beside the bread basket. There was something else I had not told anyone. 3 weeks before the engagement dinner, the city's building authority had issued a formal query on the foundation design of Webb Tower. It was not a rejection. It was a request for additional certification on the load-bearing calculations for the northeastern foundation cluster, which sat above an underground water channel that had been identified in a late-stage geotechnical survey. The authority required a signed structural certification from the lead engineer before the project could resume. I had been working on the response document for 2 weeks. Until I signed it, the entire construction project was paused. Cranes stationary. Workers stood down. Every day of delay costing Marcus Webb's firm a significant amount of money. I was the only person in the world who could sign that document. I had not yet signed it because I was being methodical, and I was simply not going to rush a certification of that technical complexity to meet someone else's timeline. I did not connect any of this to the engagement dinner until I pulled up to the venue, stepped out of my car, looked up at the city skyline, and saw the tower. The venue was a rooftop restaurant on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The city spread out below and around it in every direction, lit up in the early evening in that particular way that makes a skyline look like it was designed for exactly this kind of occasion. I stepped out of the elevator, walked through the entrance, and stopped. Through the glass on the northern wall, visible against the darkening sky about 8 blocks away, was Webb Tower. 32 floors of steel and concrete, wrapped in scaffolding, completely still. No cranes moving. No construction lights. Just the dark skeleton of a building I had designed, sitting motionless above the city, while its owner stood 40 feet away from me holding a glass of champagne and talking to my father. I stood at the entrance for a long moment. I had not known the venue would have this view. I had not planned for this. I took a slow breath, straightened my jacket, and walked into the room. I found my seat, which was at the far end of the table, which was where I always ended up, and I looked at the menu without reading a single word on it. The room was beautiful. Simone had always had excellent taste, and the engagement dinner reflected it completely. Soft lighting, white flowers, a custom seating arrangement printed on cardstock, a photographer moving quietly around the edges of the room. 60 guests filled the space with the warm noise of a celebration that everyone was happy to be part of. I recognized most of them. Family friends. Cousins. A few of Simone's close friends who had known me since childhood and greeted me warmly, but briefly before returning to the more interesting gravitational pull of the evening center. My father found me near the drinks table early in the evening. He hugged me and said I looked well and asked about my drive. We talked for about 4 minutes before someone else arrived and pulled his attention away. Aunt Petra found me next. She was 65 and had spent 30 years as a civil engineer before retiring. She was the only person in my family who greeted me by asking what I was working on rather than how I was doing. I told her the project name. She looked at me, then through the glass at the skyline, then back at me. She said, "That one?" I said, "That one." I met Marcus Webb formally about an hour into the evening, when Simone brought him over to the far end of the table during a natural break in the dinner. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something real and knew it. He shook my hand and said it was good to meet me. Simone said, "This is my older sister Scarlett. She works in engineering somewhere." She said it exactly like that. Engineering somewhere, with the light, pleasant tone she used when she was describing something she found mildly interesting but not worth more than a few words. Marcus said, "What kind of engineering?" Simone was already turning slightly toward another conversation, already moving on. I said, "Structural." He nodded in the polite, social way that people nod at dinner parties when they are acknowledging something rather than engaging with it. He said, "Interesting." We exchanged a few more words, the kind that are warm but surface level, and then the conversation moved on. He did not connect my name to his project. He had no reason to. I was Simone's sister at an engagement dinner. I was not a person he expected to encounter in a professional context. Not yet. Simone stood up an hour and a half into the dinner. She tapped her glass and the room gave her its attention immediately, the way rooms always gave Simone their attention. She was radiant in the way that people are radiant when they are in the middle of the best version of their own story. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked the venue. She thanked our parents for everything they had given her, which got a warm response from the room because Gerald Owens was well-liked and the sentiment was genuine. She talked about Marcus. She talked about the life they were building together. She talked about the future with the easy confidence of someone who had never seriously doubted that her future would be worth talking about. She was charming and gracious, and the room was entirely with her. I listened. I held my glass. I smiled when the moment called for it. And then she reached the part of her speech where she acknowledged the family members individually, moving through them one by one with a warm word for each, and eventually she reached the far end of the table, and she looked at me with her head tilted slightly and her smile still perfectly in place. She said, "And then there is my sister Scarlett. Some of you know Scarlett. She has always done things her own way." She paused, and the pause had a shape to it, the kind of pause that frames what comes next as a punchline. She said, "She is the family embarrassment, but we love her for it." She said it lightly, warmly, with a laugh underneath it. The room gave a polite, uncertain ripple of response, some small laughs, some shifted glances, the social murmur that fills a room when people are not sure whether something is a genuine joke or not. My mother made the tight smile. My father looked briefly at his plate. I did not move. I kept my expression completely still and held my glass with both hands and looked at a point just above Simone's shoulder. I had heard worse. I had absorbed worse in smaller rooms with fewer witnesses. The particular thing about being the quiet one in a family is that you become very good at receiving this kind of moment without giving anything back. I breathed once, slowly, and waited. Across the table, Aunt Petra had set her glass down and was watching Marcus Webb's face with the focused attention of someone who knows exactly what is about to happen. Marcus Webb had gone still. Not dramatically, from across the room, it would have looked like nothing. But I was 4 seats from him and I saw it. His glass had stopped moving halfway to his mouth. His expression had not changed exactly, but the quality behind it had. He was looking at me with the particular focus of someone whose mind is running a calculation in real time. Simone was still speaking. She had moved on to a story about how she and Marcus met, but Marcus was not listening to it. He was looking at me, and I could see the precise moment when the pieces connected. Structural engineer. Scarlett. The project that was currently frozen while he waited for certification from a lead engineer whose name he had seen on every document for 18 months. I watched it arrive on his face in stages. First the question, then the recognition, then the weight of understanding what that recognition meant. He set his glass down with great care. He looked at me directly. The question he asked was quiet enough that only the people immediately around us could hear it. He said, "What is your last name?" I told him my full name. Scarlett Owens. I said it the way I always said my name, plainly and directly, without any preparation or performance. Simone was mid-sentence somewhere to my left, describing the restaurant where she and Marcus had their first dinner. Marcus was not listening. He said, "You work at Harmon Infrastructure." It was not a question. I confirmed that I did. He said, "You are the structural lead on the Webb Tower project." Also not a question. I said yes. The table around us had gone quiet in the particular way that nearby conversations go quiet when they sense that something significant is happening between 2 people, and they want to hear it without being seen to listen. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Simone, who had stopped speaking and was looking between us with a small, uncertain smile. The smile of someone who has just realized the room is no longer watching her and cannot yet identify why. Marcus turned back to me. He said, "You are the reason my building is standing right now." He said it quietly, with complete conviction, and every word of it was true. Simone said, "What are you talking about?" Her voice was still light, still carrying the social ease of the evening. She had not yet understood the full shape of what was happening. Marcus looked at her and said, carefully and clearly, "The Webb Tower project. The development I have been building for 18 months. The structural engineering lead on that project, the person whose calculations and designs are the reason the building is structurally sound, is your sister." Simone blinked. She looked at me. I held her gaze without expression. She said, "Scarlett does buildings?" The way she said it, the genuine surprise in it, the slight emphasis on does, as if the idea of me doing anything significant was a concept that required special processing, was its own kind of answer about everything I had stopped explaining years ago. Marcus said, "She does not just do buildings." He said, "For the last 3 weeks, my entire project has been paused while we wait for a certification that only she can provide." He said, "My firm is losing money every day that certification has not been signed. And the person I have been waiting for has been sitting at this table the entire evening." The table was fully quiet now. Not just the people nearest to us. The whole end of the table. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. People were holding glasses they had forgotten to drink from. My father had both hands flat on the table and was looking at Marcus with the steady, absorbing attention of someone being given information they do not know how to fit into the picture they already have. My mother had turned toward us. Aunt Petra had not moved since she put her glass down. She was watching Gerald's face with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a moment to arrive and is now watching it unfold. Marcus continued. He said, "The Webb Tower project is the biggest development my firm has ever undertaken." He said, "When the city authority issued the query 3 weeks ago, I was told the lead engineer was handling the certification response personally." He said, I was told her name. He looked at me. He said, I just did not know she was going to be sitting at my engagement dinner. I held his gaze steadily. I said, I had not made the connection either. That was true. It had not been a strategy. It had simply been the world being smaller than we knew. My father spoke. He said, Scarlett is the lead engineer on your tower? He said it with the particular tone of a man who is genuinely trying to catch up with information that is arriving faster than he can process. Marcus said, Yes. He said, She has been leading the structural design of the project since it began. Gerald looked at me. He looked at the skyline through the glass, at the dark, still shape of the tower visible against the evening sky. Then he looked back at Marcus. He said, The tower we can see from here? Marcus confirmed it. My father was quiet for a moment. I watched him looking at the building. I had never told him the name of my current project. He had never asked for the name, only whether the work was going well, which I had always said yes to, which had always been enough for him. He was looking at the structure with the expression of a man seeing something for the first time that had been in front of him all along. Not guilt exactly. More like the particular weight of realizing that a version of your daughter you never knew existed has been out doing significant things while you were busy being proud of someone else. Simone's voice came from my left. She said, I did not know. It was a small sentence. It was also the truest thing she had said all evening. I turned and looked at her. She was not performing anymore. The engagement dinner confidence, the radiance, the ease, the sense of complete command over her own room, had receded. She looked younger than 22. She looked like the girl I had grown up with before we grew into people who mostly sent each other group messages. I said, I know you did not know. She said, Why did you never say anything? I thought about the answer to that for a moment. I had several honest answers available. I chose the simplest one. I said, Because you never once asked. Not with anger. Not with blame. Just as a plain fact, the same kind of fact that explains a long silence better than any argument ever could. She absorbed it. The table was still quiet around us. Marcus was watching our exchange with a careful, attentive expression of a man who is quietly understanding several significant things at once about the family he is about to marry into. Aunt Petra spoke for the first time since the room had shifted. She did not stand up or call for attention. She simply spoke from her seat in a clear, steady voice that carried without effort the way the voices of people who have spent decades in professional rooms always carry. She said, Scarlett designed the first independent load-bearing framework in this firm's history that passed city review on the first submission with 0 revision requests. She said, She did that at 24 years old. She said, I have been an engineer for 30 years, and I have seen 3 people do that. She picked up her glass, took one sip, and set it down. She said nothing further. She did not need to. The room did the rest. Several people at the table were now looking at me with the recalibrated attention of people who have just been given information that requires them to adjust the picture they have been working with. My father's jaw was tight in the way it got when he was feeling something he had not expected to feel. Marcus was looking at his hands on the table. Simone was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, open and uncertain, and something very close to awe. Marcus looked up. He said, I owe you more than a dinner. He said it with the direct simplicity of someone who means exactly what they say and has decided that the social context of the room is less important than saying it accurately. He said, The Webb Tower project has employed 43 construction workers for 18 months. It represents 4 years of planning and the largest capital investment my firm has ever made. He said, Every person on that site, every family depending on that paycheck, all of it currently depends on a signature from a 25-year-old structural engineer sitting at this table all evening while my fiancé called her the family embarrassment. He said it without heat. He said it the way engineers state facts, precisely, without decoration, because the precision is what gives the fact its weight. Simone made a small sound beside me. I did not look at her. I looked at Marcus and said, The certification will be signed next week. He nodded once. He said, I know it will. There was something in the way he said it, not a demand, not a request, just the calm certainty of someone who has looked across a table and correctly identified what kind of person they're looking at. The dinner resumed around us, the way dinners do after significant moments, carefully, with extra attention given to the ordinary things like refilling glasses and passing bread, as if the familiar domestic gestures can smooth over the changed shape of the air. But the room was different from what it had been before Simone's speech. The configuration of who was paying attention to whom had shifted in the way it shifts when a room has collectively updated its understanding of something. People who had been focused on Simone all evening were now glancing toward my end of the table. My father had barely spoken since Marcus's words. He sat with a stillness that was unusual for him. Gerald Owens was not a man who went quiet often. He was a man who filled rooms with his presence and his opinions and his easy, uncomplicated pride. The quiet sitting on him now had a different quality. It was the quiet of someone doing serious internal accounting. I did not perform anything for it. I ate my food and drank my water, and let the evening be what it was going to be, without trying to manage it. Aunt Petra caught my eye once from across the table and gave me the smallest, most precise nod I had ever received. Simone found me near the end of the evening. The dinner was winding down, and the guests were beginning to say their goodbyes. She appeared beside me while I was looking through the glass at the skyline, at the dark still frame of the tower 8 blocks north. She stood next to me and looked at it too. We stood like that for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "It is really yours?" I said, "The structural design is." She said, "You have been doing this the whole time?" I said, "For a while now, yes." She was quiet. The tower stood motionless against the sky, scaffolding wrapped around its frame, cranes still, everything waiting. She said, "I did not mean it the way it sounded." Her voice had the rawness of something genuine underneath its usual polish. I believed her. She had not called me the family embarrassment because she thought it was deeply true. She had said it because it was the role I had occupied for so long that it had stopped seeming like a label and started feeling like a fact. Nobody had given her reason to question it. I said, "I know." I meant it. My father found me by the elevator as the last guests were leaving. He looked like he had been trying to find the right moment to speak to me for the last 2 hours and had finally stopped waiting for the right moment and was simply speaking. He said, "How long?" I knew what he was asking. I said, "The web tower project, 18 months. The structural engineering career, 2 years. He said, "Why did you never tell us?" I had given this answer to Simone, and I had a shorter version ready for him. I said, because every time I tried, the conversation moved somewhere else before I finished a sentence. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I had not expected. He said, "That is not an excuse." He said it looking at the floor, not at me, the way people say things when they are not trying to win an argument but are simply trying to be honest. He said, "I should have asked more questions." Between us were 25 years of a dynamic assembled so gradually that neither of us had noticed its shape until tonight. I said, "There is still time to ask." He said, "Yes." His voice was rough at the edges. I let that be enough. Marcus shook my hand at the door. He thanked me for coming. He said, "I hope the next time we see each other it is across a conference table." I said I hoped so too. He held my hand for a moment and said, "She did not know." I understood he was talking about Simone. I said, "I know." He said, "For what it is worth, the people on my team who have read your documentation, your calculations, your design decisions, they talk about your work the way people talk about something they are genuinely impressed by." I thanked him simply. He released my hand and stepped back to rejoin the remaining guests. I got my coat and walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. I stood alone in the small mirrored box as it descended and looked at my own reflection. Scarlett Owens, 25, structural engineer, the family embarrassment, and felt something I had not expected to feel on the way home from an event like this. Not vindication, exactly. Something quieter. The particular satisfaction of someone who has done their work seriously and in private for a long time, and has just watched that work arrive in a room they never expected it to enter. The following morning I was back at my desk at Harmon Infrastructure Group. The certification document for Web Tower was open on my screen, 43 pages of structural analysis, load calculations, and geological assessment that I had been preparing for 2 weeks. I made 2 final amendments to the foundation cluster section, ran a complete technical review of the document from the first page to the last, and found nothing that required further change. The analysis was sound. The calculations were accurate. The revised load-bearing certification addressed every point the city authority had raised and provided the additional documentation they had requested. I printed the final version, reviewed the signature page, and signed it. My name, my credentials, my registration number, the date. I scanned it, sent it to the project manager with a covering note for the authority submission, and saved a copy to my personal records. Then I made coffee and opened the next file on my desk. It was an ordinary morning. The work was what it always was: precise, careful, and significant in ways that would not be visible to most people but would matter enormously to the ones who depended on it. That was how it had always been. I was not troubled by that. I never had been. Simone called me 4 days after the engagement dinner. I was on the train home from a site visit when the call came through. I answered. She said, "I have been thinking about what to say for 4 days, and I still do not have it right." I said, "Say what you have." She said, "I am sorry." 2 words. Then she said, "I have been so focused on my own story that I did not notice yours was happening." She said, "That is not something I can fix by saying sorry, but I wanted to say it anyway." I listened to all of it from my seat on the train with the city moving past the window in the late afternoon light. When she finished, I said, "Thank you for calling." She said, "Are we okay?" Okay was a broad word. We were not going to become different people overnight. Simone would still be the bright one. I would still be the quiet one. Family dinners would still carry their familiar weight. But something had shifted in the foundation, which was, appropriately, exactly my area of expertise. I told her we were okay. She exhaled. We talked for 20 minutes about something ordinary. It was the best conversation we had had in years. The city authority approved the certification 11 days after I submitted it. The project manager sent me the confirmation email at 8:14 in the morning and copied Marcus Webb's office. Within 3 hours, the construction site at Webb Tower was operational again. I knew because I walked past it on my lunch break. I had started taking that route without quite acknowledging why. The cranes were moving. The scaffolding was alive with workers. The building was growing again, floor by floor, in the way that buildings grow when the engineering beneath them is sound. I stood on the pavement across the street for a few minutes and watched. Nobody around me knew why the project had been paused or why it had resumed. Nobody knew that the calculations that kept that structure standing had been produced by a 25-year-old sitting alone at her desk at 6 in the morning. That was fine. That had always been fine. The work did not require an audience to be real. The building would stand for 100 years whether or not anyone at the engagement dinner ever thought about the person who designed it. But I knew. And Aunt Petra knew. And now, for the first time, so did the people who should have known all along. Marcus Webb's firm sent a formal letter of recognition to Harmon Infrastructure Group the following week. It cited my work on the Webb Tower project specifically, named me as the lead structural engineer, and requested that I be considered as the primary engineering contact for their next 3 development projects. My director called me into her office and placed the letter on the desk between us without speaking. I read it. Then she said, "I have been trying to find the right opportunity to discuss your career trajectory. I think that opportunity has just arrived with its own introduction." I smiled and sat down and we talked for an hour about what came next. On my way home that evening, I took the long route past Webb Tower. The crane was moving against the darkening sky, steady and deliberate, doing exactly what it was built to do. I stopped on the pavement and looked up at the structure, my calculations, my design, my name in the documents that would live in that building's file for as long as the building stood. I had not gone to that dinner to be seen. I had only shown up and done the work that was mine to do. Quiet work does not stay quiet forever. Eventually, the building rises.